to whatever it often is, we do at Change Chat, which is on today how teams support each other through LGR, a psychological perspective. For those that don't know me, I'm Fraser Collins. I look after business development and partnerships here at Trueman Change. I'm hosting today's session, which I hope you find very useful. It's great to see, as I say, how many people that are joining today. It's a big number who've registered, which I think shows the relevance of and importance of the subject of LGR, especially at this time, as we approach summer and decisions are coming through to councils and as leaders, and councils look at supporting people through the journey. So hopefully good timing for you to pick up and take away some good stuff from today. So for those that haven't joined us before, maybe don't know us, we are Trueman Change. So we are a specialist change consultancy, change management consultancy, and we spend a massive amount of time with local authorities, within local authorities, working closely with leadership teams, managers, staff as they navigate change, but more relevant to today as they navigate LGR. And we are working with quite a number of councils going through that journey just now. So today, leaning on our expertise and more so Lucy's expertise, we thought it would be helpful to concentrate on how teams support each other through this time. Quick bit of housekeeping, as always. So the session's informal, it's interactive. Please, put your hand up on the call, or you can ask questions when we maybe stop halfway in at the end. Please do ask anything, and the session is recorded, so I will share it after today, so you've got it. If you need to jump off or you want to share with anybody, you can do that as well, and it will be available on our channels as normal. So intro, Lucy, without further ado, Lucy, founder of Trueman Change, Organisational Psychologist, will be running the session and I'll be hosting, as I say. So Lucy, I'll let you introduce yourself first of all before we jump in.
Hi everyone. So thank you very much for joining us today. We run these sessions about every 6 to 8 weeks. We pick a different topic each time, and today's topic is all about LGR because that's a really hot topic for our clients at the moment. So I'm a change and transformation specialist. I worked as a project and program manager and then retrained as a psychologist because I felt that sort of project and program management methodology really works for managing your resources and your actions, but doesn't necessarily work as well for the people side of change. So what we do is we help local authorities do change well, and because almost all of our customers are local authorities, and quite a lot of our customers at the moment are going through the LGR process, which is why we chose the topic today.
Thank you. Right, so let's jump in. Lucy, on LGR, for people who might be new to this space, and some maybe not so, but those who are new to it, what is LGR? Why does it matter from a psychological perspective more than anything?
So I imagine if you're on this call, you're probably going through LGR, so you probably know what it is. I think what is interesting from a psychological perspective is that local government reorganisation is fundamentally a structural change. It's even could be regarded as a sort of administration change. It is about how the government wants to reduce the number of councils and wants to create, it wants to get rid of two-tier councils where we've got counties and districts and create a smaller number of bigger unitary councils. So from a change and transformation perspective, it is a very governance heavy, you've got to get it safe, you've got to get it legal. It's quite an existential kind of restructure. But for the average member of staff in a council, their day-to-day work on day one of the new organisation, so the old organisations will be disbanded, people would be transferred into a new unitary organisation that will be bigger, but their day-to-day work won't actually change on day one. So it might change quite quickly if you're in a sort of corporate service, like IT and HR. But if you're in a frontline delivery service, your day-to-day work is likely to change gradually over a number of years rather than this big bang on day one. But the problem is, because it is from a psychology perspective, it's actually a very, very human process. So we know from the world of psychology that when we change a structure or a process, it creates a level of discomfort and a level of disruption and a level, it can create resistance. But, you know, if, for example, your council suddenly decided that they were changing from, you know, Windows to Apple or something IT based, there'd be a lot of noise. People would be quite frustrated, but, you know, it would be a pain rather than something quite deep. We know from the world of organizational psychology that there is certain types of change that impact us on a much deeper level, which is what I think LGR is. So even though the day-to-day won't change necessarily for most employees on day one, they will feel this change much harder than they would feel a normal change and kind of transformation program. And so some examples of that are things like our sense of identity. So when we have a sense of professional identity, there's loads of research around professional identity. Sometimes that's with our profession. So a doctor usually says they're a doctor rather than they work at such and such a surgery or hospital. In retail, for example, it's usually a brand. So people say they work for John Lewis or for Marks and Spencer's. In local government, we have a place-based sense of identity and a public service sense of identity. So we're messing with the sense of place that people feel an attachment to. We're messing with the institutional organisation that people feel an attachment to, and people don't know who they're going to be working with. People don't have a lot of autonomy. So it's a funny one because this change feels much bigger than it is for most people in council. That's not true for everybody because, you know, for some people, your most senior people, they probably will experience change. You know, they for example, chief execs, they're definitely going to experience change because you can't go from like 11 chief execs to 2 without there being some personal impact. But for most frontline people, that change will happen gradually over a number of years. But yeah, that's why I think it was interesting to look at this through that psychology lens, because what leaders are having to deal with at the moment is this heightened tension, this heightened uncertainty, this heightened emotion. So yeah, that's what today's session is really about, is exploring why is this such a big thing for people and how do we help each other through it.
Brilliant. Okay. So with that in mind, the kind of hidden, if you like, human dynamics of it, what actually happens psychologically to people during, you know, something like LGR?
Yeah, so there's a few things at play and it is really complex. So the first one, as I touched on, very much that sense of identity threat. And I think that's particularly strong because local government has traditionally been a career of, you know, it's an institution. A lot of people have been in a council for a long time. You get a lot of multi-generational families in councils. So, you know, I'm sure many of you know somebody, or maybe you are somebody who a member of your family works in either the same council or a different council. It's seen to be, you know, a part of the community. So that sense of attachment and that sense of identity runs quite deep. And this is tinkering with that. It's messing with that a little bit. So that's challenge number one. Challenge number two is uncertainty. Now, uncertainty is often viewed as a negative thing, which I don't think is fair, because uncertainty, you know, it's really not the uncertainty itself that's negative. It's where it takes us. So if uncertainty takes us to a place of curiosity and growth and innovation, then actually that's quite positive, which is where you hear terms like disruption being positive. Where it takes us to a place of fear, then it has a negative impact. And the problem with LGR is it's a long period of uncertainty. It's a lot of work to get done. But from the average member of staff perspective, they will have heard at a point in time that LGR was a possibility. By the time it actually gets to vesting day, depending on which timeline you're on, because I know not everybody's on the same timeline, but it could be multiple years. So there is a drain there in living with that level of uncertainty. And there's a drain there for managers and leaders because they are also living with that uncertainty. So it's not a case that they can just kind of provide the certainty that people want. So that's another issue with it. Very linked to that is change fatigue, which the jury's still out on change fatigue for me personally, because I think I use this example a lot, but if you won the lottery tomorrow, your life would change exponentially, but nobody would talk to you about change fatigue. So I don't think it's change that makes us fatigue. I think it's change not done very well that makes us fatigue. But I do think that the level of uncertainty, the amount of disruption, the impact to identity does increase, I think, a risk of burnout, particularly with middle to senior people that are having to do all of the hard work of the safe and legal stuff to get this over the line. So yeah, there are a number of different things going on. The final thing I do want to touch on is, again, if we look at the world of psychology, we know that something that has a really positive impact on us is a sense of autonomy. You know, we generally don't like being micromanaged and told what to do. We like to have some autonomy in how we work. And because this is very much a government-driven, top-down agenda, it has to happen. There's been this weird period of, you know, areas creating competing business cases, but the government is still deciding which one is going to go with. So there is a real sense of lack of autonomy, even at the most very senior level. So even chief execs, even council leaders, they don't have as much autonomy in this particular change as they would do normally. So when you put all that together, there's quite a lot going on psychologically, and that's not even touching on, you know, culture change, which I will come to and talk about. So there's quite a lot, I think, that we can pull from the world of psychology to help us understand what's going on here and help us prepare our people to go through it, because it is a tough journey. And, you know, there is a risk that people almost underestimate how tough of a journey it is because, you know, they're frustrated and they're trying to get everything done because you've got this period of time where it's all, we've got to get this over the line. This program managed within an inch of its life. You know, we can easily lose patience with the fact that there's some real identity work going on here and there's some real anxiety and some uncertainty going on. So it's about where can we draw from these different models to help us understand and unpick some of this.
Yeah. So you mentioned culture there, and you know, you mentioned a lot about teams and their cultures and how they can make or break, how that makes or break LGR. Why is that then? Why do you think that is?
So generally speaking, culture makes or breaks anything and everything. So it's something that, and we will all know this. And a lot of the world of, you know, psychology of the workplace is quite instinctive and it's stuff that we already know. But I imagine, and do please feel free to share. And if anybody wants to put the comments in the chat, please do. Most of us will have worked in an organisation at some point in our career where the culture wasn't great and we felt that we didn't fit in with that. So we know the power of good culture and bad culture as an employee. We know that, we've experienced it. Where it's particularly powerful in LGR, and I can draw actually from the private sector in this because there's not really enough research in the public sector around this, but there is a lot of research from the private sector around mergers and acquisitions, which I know it's not quite the same thing. However, the psychological perspective of bringing people together from different organizations and rebranding them as one is, I think, is relevant learning for us. And the results were quite stark in terms of how much the people that did cultural preparatory work as they went through the transition had much better financial outcomes, because that's how the private sector measure much better financial outcomes than the ones that didn't. Now, from a psychology perspective, that makes sense because some of our core needs in the workplace are about, as I said before, our sense of autonomy, which is a cultural thing. You know, we'll have all been on a spectrum of working in organisations where we had autonomy, where we didn't. Trust, we'll have worked in places where we've had high trust and places where we didn't. But also kind of how people communicate, how people behave. What are the hidden norms within teams? And in local government, you'll have a variety anyway, because you've got such a wide, diverse types of services going. So you'll have different cultures maybe in your procurement team, as you do in your waste team, as you do in, you know, if you are in a county level, your social care teams, they will be different cultures. When you then add to that level of complexity that you bring in teams together from multiple different places, they have different norms. So that's why the results from the private sector showed that if you prepare people for that and you get people engaging and shaping that culture as part of the transition, they will fare much better once they come out of it the other side. We've done quite a lot of research interviewing people in local government that have been through this process, and some of our clients that we're working with at the moment on cultural work and have been through the process. So we're working, for example, with Westmoreland and Furness, who are 3 years down the line and are doing a culture review. So we've seen firsthand what that actually looks like. And if you end up in a situation where you haven't done that cultural reflection and preparatory work, and you're putting people in teams with people from other councils that actually have very different norms, very different behaviours, very different leadership styles, what it creates, if you're not careful, is a real sense of them and us. So it's very important to be thinking about the culture of your teams as you go through this. And it's not always negative things. So we've done one recently where it was actually a really lovely culture, lovely culture of a council. But one of their kind of cultural assumptions that they were carrying was that we are the best council, which under normal circumstances, you'd absolutely want your staff to hold that belief. But you can see how holding that belief as you go into this process could potentially be a bit risky and a bit damaging. So it's about understanding what is the culture right now, what are the norms, how do people behave in these teams, and let's see if we can predict where some of the tension and the conflict might be so we can manage that process rather than just have a bunch of people coming together for the first time on vesting day and realizing they're all speaking different languages.
Okay, yeah. So for those on the call who maybe wondering what good looks like, and I know from your expertise, the work we are doing with many councils going through this, the research that we do that we have done as well, there's obviously a lot of knowledge there from that. Lucy, what do resilient, from your take on that, what do resilient high functioning teams do differently during LGR?
Yeah, so there was a really big piece of research done, which I think might have originally been started by Google. I'm not sure, but it became the foundation of what we now refer to as psychological safety. So they did a piece of work where they looked at what is the thing that high performing teams have in common. And interestingly, because of we've just come from talking about culture, actually cultures can be very different but still be high performing. So an example I always give is that, if you went into an office environment, or perhaps let's go even more extreme, if you went to maybe like the registrar's service, where it's quite a somber place to work, and people were shouting and swearing at each other, you would immediately say this is a bad culture. But if you went into Gordon Ramsay's kitchen in a very high performing, very top of the range restaurant, and people were shouting and swearing at each other, you wouldn't interpret that in the same way. So culture is highly contextual, and it can be difficult to say what does high performing look like, because it does look different in different places. However, the thing that high performing teams do have in common is psychological safety. And what psychological safety is, and I worry we need to rename it a little bit, because if it kind of creates this like sense of comfort, it's safety, it's nice, it's safe, it's happy. What it's actually about, though, is our ability to challenge how safe are we to speak our mind, how safe are we to say there might be a better way of doing this. Because if we're not safe to say that, then we won't get to be high performing, because high performing means constantly evolving and changing and improving yourself. So safety is a really, really important thing to have. And that is difficult when you're going through LGR, because it doesn't feel safe. It's very high profile, for people that are still waiting for their outcomes. There may well have been real political tensions going on in your area in terms of, one council saying we absolutely can't partner up with that council. And so we've not started off in the best way, to be honest, to create that sense of safety. But that sense of safety is what will take us high performing. And part of that sense of safety does come down to a bit of a tolerance for uncertainty, which requires a high level of support. So there's a matrix that I always think is useful from Kim Stott around feedback, where, what's the level of care and support that you're giving somebody versus what's the level of like how much you're pushing them to do better. And actually high performing teams do both of those. They combine really like high expectations but with high support. So I think for people that are going through it at the moment, if you want to make sure that you are a high performing team going through this process, make sure that there is that safety and that people can talk about what they're struggling with and suggest things and come up with good ideas, and make sure that you are giving them the support that they need to in order to deliver what they need to deliver. The other thing that doesn't come out as strong in terms of, you know, kind of research, because a lot of, as I said, a lot of research is private sector driven. One of our best assets in local government is that sense of public service. And most people that are in councils are doing it because they care about the public. They care about, you know, the community that they're supporting. And within all of the sort of structural stuff and which council's which and the politics, you know, big P and small p, we can sometimes lose sight of that. So when you're going through LGR, the thing that you are most likely to have in common with these scary people from another council who you don't know, who are going to be coming in and might have a different culture to you, the thing you are likely to have in common with them is a sense of purpose. And I worry that so much of the comms and engagement around LGR focuses very much on, you know, this kind of process and the governance, and this has been set up and we've got a shadow cabinet and this has been set up, and it doesn't necessarily talk enough about that sense of purpose. So a high performing team has a sense of safety, they have some resilience, they can cope with a bit of uncertainty, and they have a shared sense of purpose. So I think they're the things that we really need to tap into as we go through this process.
Okay. We'll maybe pause for a second and answer, if you can, question. Thanks, Catherine. So, Catherine, had us a couple of questions. So, one, if you work in staff engagement, culture, etc., how can you best prepare, support staff, managers in the lead up to vesting day? And secondly, what can senior leaders do to help bring out the best of all those cultures coming together? Thanks, Catherine. That's a good question.
Thank you. So I know, Catherine, you're on like the fastest of fast tracks. So is it next year that you guys are going live? So you're really getting to that crunch point just before.
Yeah, 1st of April, 2027.
Yes, yeah. So you're hurtling towards it at great speed. So I think that, and I know your council, and I know you've got a fantastic culture. So I think that in your position where you are now, because you're getting closer and closer to go live, I'd be thinking about, and I'm not a comms specialist, I'm a psychologist, I'd be thinking about balancing your comms with practical, like tangible information, but also linking to that sense of purpose. That's what I'd be doing. I'd be dancing between those two things. For people that are on the call that are not hurtling quite as fast, so people that are going live in, you know, a year or two's time, you won't have those practical things yet. You won't have the sort of you won't have the level of certainty that perhaps Catherine's team has, and you still won't have anywhere near as much as you'd like, I'm sure. For people that are on not going live next year, I'd be focusing very heavily on that sense of purpose, because it's that will draw people together. I would also, if you can, and I know that this won't be in your gift as one council, but if you can, I'd be working with who else you're going to be coming together with, because you know that and you know who those councils are. And I'd be starting to do some cross-council engagement, particularly around culture and values, because I think what a lot of people are going to do is they're going to wait until they've definitely got a new leader, definitely got a new chief exec, maybe even got like a director of HR before they start thinking about the wording of values. The reality is, I work with councils all around the country. The wording of their values are not that different, and you can wait until those people are in post to finish it. But I think anything you can do to build that sense of autonomy, if you can run staff events around the region saying, right, you know, give us your feedback of what you want the values to contain. You don't get them choosing exact words, because they won't be able to choose that anyway, but start to gather that feedback so that people are involved in that process of building the future. I think in terms of senior leaders, so there's a power in understanding cultures from the different organisations. And I know I would say that because we do culture reviews, but there is a real power in, and I know we've done one for you, being able to say, well, this is our culture and this is what we've thought about. This is where we think we bring some real strengths, but this is where we think that we might hit some, potential tension. Having that information across all the partners is really, really powerful. But I also think the stuff that we do with leaders is around giving them sometimes one-to-one support and coaching, because they're more personally impacted than staff are, but also getting them to a place where they can sit in the discomfort of uncertainty. What I see a lot of leaders do, and you'll see this loads being a comms person, when they're not 100% sure, they just lean back and they don't engage. But that creates a vacuum. So actually giving leaders the skill to be able to hold that uncertainty and say, well, we don't know that yet, but here's what we do know, and here's how you can shape things, will definitely increase that kind of engagement as you go through the process. Does that answer your questions?
It does. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Lucy, just to expand on the uncertainty side then, looking at that, how should teams, in your opinion, deal with uncertainty when the leaders themselves genuinely don't have answers? I know this is mentioned to us and the people we speak to, and it's an issue, so, how can teams deal with that in general?
Yeah. So first of all, we have individual differences in terms of our tolerance to uncertainty. I know this because my mother has way lower tolerance to uncertainty than I do. And whenever I try and plan anything with her, it needs to be very, very planned. So we have individual differences. Some of us are, and as you would expect, somebody that's like really into change and transformation is probably going to have a higher level of tolerance for uncertainty. So we need to accept that tolerance varies. There are some things, though, that we know generally help people's tolerance to uncertainty. So one we've already talked about is autonomy. So when people feel like they can shape something to do with the future, even if they don't have the exact detail of how we're going to get there, if they can influence it or shape it, that increases their tolerance for uncertainty. The second thing that increases our tolerance to uncertainty is basically the relationships and the level of safety we have with people around us. So if you've got a really good line manager who you feel like has got your back and they say, do you know what, I don't know, but we'll be okay, we'll work it out, you can probably accept that. If you've got quite a toxic relationship with your line manager and you feel like, they're checking up on everything you do and you need to know exactly where you stand with them, then your tolerance for uncertainty will be lower than that. So we need that sense of autonomy. We need good relationships with people around us. And there's quite a bit of research around what people call sense making, which links us back to our sense of purpose. So generally speaking, if we understand the overall aim and we can make sense of the story of why we're doing this, we can tolerate some uncertainty about the detail. When we can't make sense of it, then we can't. Now, that's particularly challenging with LGR because we have a wide spectrum of people that I'm speaking to, and you will be the same. You will all recognize this on the call. There are some people that think, you know what, it's going to be a pain to get through it, but it's probably the right thing. It'll probably be more effective. And then there'll be people right at the other end of that spectrum that have worked, they very passionately believe that small is better, that local councils do a better job, and that we're basically, hacking up local government and we're going to do a horrendous damage to it. So if we can't make sense of it, then it's a challenge. And it's a big challenge if you are in an organisation where the leaders are at that end of the spectrum where they don't believe in this, then that is going to make it even more difficult for people to tolerate the uncertainty. So if you're a senior leader, you need to acknowledge that you have a lot of influence here, and you need to think about what is the story behind LGR. How do we link it back to, this is about helping the public, this is to link it back to that sense of purpose, and not get too wrapped up in the whys and wherefores and the structuring of it and the administration. Currently, some of you may not have had your decision yet, some of you may be quite far down the line, like Catherine's council. When you are in that, we've got to get it over the line, you go into a process place mindset by nature, because you have to, because you've got to be thinking about, have we covered all the legalities? Have we got the right constitution? Really challenge yourselves and each other to pull yourself out of that headspace and think about the purpose of it and building something exciting, because that will increase people's tolerance for risk. So autonomy, good relationships, a level of safety, and being able to make sense of it, and being mindful of our own language and our own behaviour as leaders. I think all those things will help with uncertainty. It is a tough one though, and I run sessions all the time for people at all different levels across local government, and people are looking to me for certainty, and I'm like, I'm not working for the government. I don't know. I'm not even working for your council. I'm just here to run a session on uncertainty. But it is challenging. But there are other ways in which we can stretch that tolerance to uncertainty, given where we are. We have to do that.
You've mentioned, you've mentioned behaviours here. So what are the, you would talk about informal behaviours. What are some of the informal behaviours that you think help or harm teams during this times of uncertainty, the LGR? What are helpful, what are harmful?
So I think that what really helps is a lot of the things that we've just talked about. So there is a tendency sometimes for leaders to, if they can't answer all staff's questions, to avoid talking to them. Actually, we know that engagement and good quality two-way engagement, even if it doesn't give us all the answers, it helps people on that journey. It helps reduce that uncertainty for them. It helps them to kind of make sense of where they're going. It helps them to prepare for the change. So I think informal conversations where it's not we have an announcement and this is what's happening, but actually helping people to think through what it means for them, what it means for their career, I think is really powerful. All of the good stuff generally, like making sure you know your team, making sure that you can support them, that you can spot when people are struggling and when they're not, and sort of normalize this. We're in this together. We don't all know the answers, but this is what we're trying to achieve. This is what we're trying to build. Kind of supportive behaviours. What is harmful is kind of being extremely judgmental, being obviously too negative, but potentially being too positive can be harmful as well, because if people feel like, well, you're just excited because you're going to get a new job and we're not going to know what's going to happen to the rest of us. So not reading the room, withdrawal from just engaging, well, we don't know what's going on, so I'm just going to ignore LGR and put my head in the sand. That's not helpful. Us and them dynamics are really, really tricky, and we're kind of we're tribal animals by nature. So, there's a lot of social psychology research about we love an in-group and an out-group, and, that it is quite ingrained in us to form groups. Unfortunately, as you go through LGR, you're reforming your group, and sometimes post LGR, people kind of inadvertently set up us and them cultures. So examples of that I see quite a lot is, the example of, well, districts and county, and this is a county takeover, or county people saying districts don't understand social care. And so you create almost this like us and them with that. You can create it with geography. So I live in Lancashire, so we've got Blackburn Council and Burnley Council. I completely suspect a lot of the rivalry is down to football teams, but you'll all have in your own area like geographical identities that create a bit of a them and us, which can sometimes be quite good fun and banter, but can sometimes go a bit too far. Interestingly, what I have seen from councils that have been through it is often you end up disaggregating the county. So you might end up with your county being split into two. So you end up with two unitaries going forward. You can actually pretty inadvertently create a bit of a them and us between the two new unitaries or the three new unitaries, whichever that is. So which again comes back to geography. It can sometimes come down to politics. So I think it's really important to be super aware as you're going through it and really be looking out for where are there us and them kind of vibes building, and how do we counteract that and stop that from happening? Because come vesting day, you don't want any us and them. You want as much of one organisation as possible.
Okay. From a football supporting perspective, you mentioned let's hope that the east side of Glasgow and the west side of Glasgow up here don't merge anytime soon. Anyway,
No,
a
I
couple
wouldn't know.
a couple of questions. So thank you, firstly, Tess. Does a strong focus on high performance perhaps impact an employee's ability to tolerate uncertainty and ambiguity? I think maybe you touched on it, but
I think so. It's one of them where there's a sweet spot, and I think in a lot of how we view sort of culture and leadership, we end up inadvertently creating like pendulum swings. So you might have an organization that's really, really people focused. And please don't ask me any questions about football because I don't know anything about football. But there's quite a lot of interesting research around this kind of topic, this kind of it's called polarity management. So how do you stop swinging? That I learned a lot from sports psychologists, and they said you see it a lot in sport because it's very high profile. So you'll have like a football team with a manager that's really people focused, and then the performance will dip because everybody's worrying about people. So then they bring in the exact opposite person who's like super high performance. It's all about goals, goals, goals. And then we swing the pendulum to the other way. And then, they might improve performance, but then the morale dips or the performance dips. So then we're like, oh God, we better bring somebody in that's better with people. So we swing between these two pendulums, which isn't particularly helpful. So yes, if you have a strong focus on high performance, that can negatively impact people if it's there without the sense of support. So you need to have both. It can positively impact people in terms of for certain personality types, then striving for goals is really positive. What I will say is in the interviews that we've done with people that have been through the process, everybody said that performance dipped as they went through this process, which, given all the stuff we've talked about and how it impacts us and the sheer mammoth amount of work there is to do, there's a level of honesty and realism about, okay, how do we make sure, because the bins still need emptying, and the harsh reality is, as much as this is a massive deal to people in the council, the public probably don't even care that much. So how do we manage with all this going on, keeping that sense of performance as stable as we can is a challenge. But yeah, it's a nuanced thing. Too much of a high performance culture can almost swing too far. Everything has a sweet spot.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Okay. I've got a question written down here about identity. You've touched on obviously the fact that many people through generations of families will be and have worked with the same council for many years. We are speaking to, the council we've spoken to recently, Lucy mentioned, I think their average, longevity of a staff member was something like 12 years. And the person we spoke to been in there for, 10. He was one of the newer members of staff. So, in terms of identity, when it comes to these organisations or any organisation merging, what actually happens, what does happen, to people when they merge?
So it is a mix, because some people, it depends where your sense of identity lies. So I actually did a session on this with a region. It was Surrey, I think. All of their comms professionals, and we really zoned in on this because from a comms perspective, understanding what the psychology behind sense of identity is really important. And as I said earlier, there are different ways in which we identify with our work. So our identity, the best description I've seen of identity is it's like a Rubik's Cube. So you'll have all these different squares, and they might be things like, in my case, psychologist. Some people would have mother, wife, auntie, person who's into swimming, whatever, all of these things. And they basically switch and churn depending on your situation. So in some situations, perhaps if you are religious, then when you are in church, the fact that you are Christian is right at the forefront of your identity. So you're switching them around depending on your context. And when we look at professional identity, that there are differences there. Some people, their professional identity is really important to them. Some people, the job is just a job. And some people, they identify with what the job is. Some people identify with, what the place is. Some people identify with what the brand is. So there are different things at play. I think that in local government, there's a tendency for that focus to be on place or the community. The reason for that is councils are institutions, they're historical. So, you go to a lot of town halls, there's a lot of symbols of kind of local government, symbols of power in many ways. So there is a sense of pride in that. There's a sense of pride in public service. But in most councils, quite a high proportion of staff in your local authority will also live in your borough. So they've also got that sense of identity as a taxpayer and as a resident of the community. And we sometimes forget that. We sometimes talk about staff and the community as if they're two different groups, but there is really significant overlap. Particularly when you look at the areas that are going through LGR, they're probably fairly rural areas. They probably don't have a high level of commuters. In London, it wouldn't be the same. In London, it'd be a smaller proportion because people commute around London. So you wouldn't necessarily be in your district. But if you're looking at like where I live in Lancashire, if you work for Preston Council, you probably live in Preston. So there's that overlap that we need to take into account. And the reason why all that matters is because people have probably built their career around that sense of place. And then you add on top of that the organisational culture and what it's like to work there. All of that has meaning for people. And what LGR is doing is it's tinkering with all of that. It's tinkering with that sense of identity and that sense of place. So it's really important that we are aware of that. One of the really interesting interviews I did when I was researching with people that had been through it was somebody that told me that they'd accidentally had a wake and they didn't want to, and they were a bit annoyed by it. And it was something that the members wanted to do. And they were like, oh God, like we ain't got enough to do. We're getting us over the line for safe and legal. Now we've got to arrange an event to close the old council down. But he then described how on the day he realised how poignant it was and how important it was for people to say goodbye. Now, there's a sweet spot there because you don't want people getting stuck on that old identity. So you need to, this is definitely something for comms professionals to think about, how do you create that narrative and that story of taking that pride and that history, and this becomes the next stage in the journey rather than that no longer exists and we are now a completely new council, which is tough because your members will want it to be that no longer exists and we're a completely new council. So making sense of that story so that people can make that shift with their identity is important. But I would come back to, again, and I know I've said this a number of times, there's quite a high level of public service identity in local government, and that's the thing that you will have in common. So that's the thing you need to focus on. You need to focus on the identity of the places and the community and helping people to kind of keep that public servant identity rather than necessarily it's attached to that particular council.
Yeah.
Which actually I've just seen Tess has commented saying it will be, it seemed to me it will be the sense of ourselves as public servants that will be the one thing that we can endure. Yeah, I would agree with that. And again, the challenge is making sure that corporately and leaders are communicating in that way, and the organisations are communicating in that way, because we do fall into, whenever we're going through change, we fall into sort of update type comms rather than focusing on purpose.
Yeah. So practical support then between colleagues. What do teams really need from each other during this time and during LGR? What's helpful?
So they do need space to talk things through. And I know that that's challenging because there's so much to do. But when I was saying earlier, creating that space with colleagues from across the council, but across future colleagues, getting people to meet their future colleagues is really super powerful. So space to reflect, the opportunity to shape. You can't have them shaping, structures at this point and really concrete things, but getting people to collaborate and work with each other and share their feedback about what kind of culture they want to have, all of that is really, really powerful. Honesty about what we know and what we don't know is really powerful. Not allowing the rumour mill to kind of get whipped up is really powerful. And so I would say teams do have a responsibility to, not kind of he said, she said, and this might happen and that might happen unless they know it's true. So I think there's definitely a responsibility there. And I think it's really about that, that peer level interaction, which I know feels like we don't have time to do, but that's certainly something we can help with. We can help facilitating events where staff can meet each other. And sometimes the benefit actually of an external person facilitating is what I said earlier, which is I can't answer deeply specific questions, but we can hold that space where people can meet each other and start to interact. We know from any type of change that the more you engage with it and the more you kind of work with it and talk about it and explore it and collaborate on it, the less of an impact that sort of traditional change curve has. So lots and lots of peer support and engagement. But I think as well, teams need to look out for each other, because there is a bit of a risk of, because everything becomes under scrutiny as you go through LGR, which council does the best way of doing procurement and which council has the best way of doing HR. And all of a sudden, everything can start to feel very competitive. Another one of our core needs, like autonomy, is competence. Generally speaking, most of us go to work wanting to do a good job. So when we're forced into this way where we're comparing and contrasting different councils, it makes us feel like we're maybe not doing a good job, when actually things have evolved in different places for different reasons at different times. So being very aware of that and making sure that we're really proactively trying to not create a them and us, I think is really powerful.
Thank you. So, has anyone got any questions at this stage? Please just ask. Before I maybe ask you to share some kind of practical takeaways, Lucy, which we'll do, but has anyone got any more questions just now?
I can see we've got a good comment from Joanne. What really struck me from the example of the wait was how intentionally acknowledging the old council creates a bridge between the endings and beginnings, Williams Bridges. So actually that is one of the few. I'm quite critical of change management methodology, because I think they often take a very sequential approach rather than a mindset approach. But that is one that I do use, and I have created a slide which applies that to LGR. The particular thing that's challenging about LGR is that we actually bounce in between those phases, because we get a false start. So we get this brand new vesting day, and it's like a wedding where we've all spent the last 2-3 years like building up to this wedding, and then we wake up and realize we've got the rest of our lives together, and it was never about that day in the first place. So I think Bridges is a really powerful tool to really critically look at through the lens of LGR, because we pretend that we're going through it and then it ends, but it doesn't at all. It really is the beginning. Rather than treating change as a clean break, it honours what comes before and making space for what's next, which I think is true. So yeah, that's a good shout. We do use Bridges as a way to make sense of this for sure. Thank you for that.
I think drawing that line's helpful. I remember working in a private sector company, and it was a UK-based organisation taken over by a big American group. And it was more the clients were affected rather than in this case where it's maybe more, staff. And that line wasn't drawn, and it caused problems. Everybody just kept referring to the old company, how it used to be and what they used to do and how you used to do that, even from a technology point of view or services and all that kind of thing. And eventually the organisation decided to get rid of a lot of the staff who were attached to the old place. That was their way of dealing with it, instead of dealing with it head on at the start and maybe introducing things like acknowledging, lines in the sand and that type of thing. That wouldn't happen in LGR, but that was a private sector example. So in terms of some kind of practical takeaways, Lucy, if someone, everybody on the call today's got maybe just one thing they could maybe take to help their team through LGR or through what they're facing just now, what would that be?
So it's hard to give one thing, because it is quite a complex situation. I think the main thing is, particularly if you are a leader, if you only take one thing away from this call, I would hope that it would be psychologically, this is a really big deal. If I was to pick up an org psych textbook, every single chapter would be relevant to LGR. When we look at, team dynamics, it tests those. Autonomy, it's testing us. Resilience, it's testing us. How we cope with uncertainty, it's testing us. This is hitting a lot of different things, our identity, our relationships. So it is a big deal. It's a big deal. It's a really exciting opportunity to like build something. Also a big deal. The second thing I would say is, knowing that it is a big deal, don't lose sight of the human beings through this journey. This horrible, stressful period of between now and vesting day. One of the tools I apply for myself personally in stress is I have a 5-year test. So I say, will this matter 5 years from now? And if the answer to that is no, then it probably doesn't warrant me getting stressed about it now. A lot of what happens in this period is really important and really urgent. But when it comes to what will happen 5 years from now, it will be the people that work there. They will matter 5 years from now. So we've got to get through this period mindful of the risks to those people and the risks to the organisational culture. So keep people at the heart of it. And the third thing, and I know I would say this, but honestly, getting an external person to look at your culture and say, this is what you're taking into this new world, and this is where there might be conflict and tension, is incredibly powerful. And again, that's something that a lot of people that we've interviewed wished that they'd had a better handle on culture before vesting day, so that they could have predicted what happened after. We all make the mistake of, in culture, there's different levels. We follow the LGR model, which is you've got your espoused, which is what the organisation says, you've got artifacts, which is what you can see, and then you've got the underlying assumptions. We all make the mistake of focusing culture on just the espoused. So we all make the mistake of thinking, well, we've made some values and we've put some posters on the wall, but actually really knowing and understanding your culture and how it needs to transition through this is incredibly powerful. So yeah, I would absolutely recommend that.
Good, thank you. Does anyone have any questions before we look to wrap up? In the meantime, what I've done...
Reflections or advice. This is a
reflections,
peer-to-peer
advice,
call. If you've got any words of wisdom for those of you that are further down the line than others, then please do share.
Please do. Hi, Tess.
Hi, no words of wisdom, but a question actually, just on that last point, about the culture review. How much should be a culture review of what is? Because in our instance, there's a lot of different councils coming together. How much of it should be a review of the different cultures of what is now, and how much of it should be a forward look of what is the culture, the culture that we want to create for the new unitary authority?
Yeah, so I think ideally 50-50. They are two different, very different questions and very different approaches. So what is the culture now is quite a deep qualitative piece of work, where we identify what are the hidden assumptions that each council is currently holding that may hold them back or may propel them forward. So, I think I gave the example of one council we did it with. They had a very deep underlying assumption that small was better. So, well, we can get stuff done quicker because we're small. We all know each other because we're small. So you can see how holding that belief for that group of people as they went into it was going to be challenging. In terms of what should the culture be, my advice would be that should be, as much as possible, a co-produced piece of work. So what you don't want is a chief exec and a couple of other people just coming up with some words on a paper and then sticking them on the wall. And it's a brilliant, brilliant opportunity to get people from the different councils meeting each other, because what we don't want is somebody going live on day one and they've suddenly got a new colleague and they don't even know that person, they've never met them before. So it's a really nice, safe way to get people together before vesting day, get them engaging, get them sharing their ideas. So I think they're two separate questions that you're answering there, and two separate pieces of work, but both are very powerful.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tess. Good question. Claire's got a quick question. Lucy, it's an interesting situation. Actually, Claire, I'm about to move job from one council to another, likely to come together as part of the LGR. See this as beneficial. Due to understand the culture of more than one authority. Do you agree?
Well, first of all, congratulations on the new job, Claire. I know we've not caught up recently, so congratulations. Absolutely. And if you want an offline chat about how we look at culture, so I can give you some tools, then you can actually start to discreetly, critically assess both. Then yeah, I think that would be really powerful. It's things like, how do people behave in meetings? How do decisions get made? You know, what leadership behaviors are normal? What stories are told? And so I can definitely share with you like a bit of a toolkit for how to assess that, so you can start to discreetly spot where some of those contradictions might be. But congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations, Claire. We'll speak to you soon.
Where
Okay,
are
I
you
have
moving to,
shared.
Claire, if you don't mind saying?
I am moving from Lancaster to Preston, and I do live in Preston. So your example earlier was perfect.
It was bang on. Congratulations.
Yeah,
Thank
good
you.
stuff. So I've posted, before we wrap up, I've posted the link for the next change chat, which is on the subject of your psychology toolkit for leading change. That's on the 17th of July. Please do click and register for that one. Just a couple of things to mention as well. Lucy and I and some of the team will be down at the LGA conference, which is in Bournemouth this year. So I'm looking forward to a bit of sunshine, but that will be from the 7th of July. So we'll be down there for 2 or 3 days. If you or any colleagues that you know are attending, we'd be delighted to catch up with you or them, and we can book in some time for Lucy to speak to them. If you want to set up a conversation, please do that. I will obviously send a follow-up to this with the recording. If you do want to catch up with us at all around how you want to maybe explore or find out a bit more about the work we've been doing with councils and the value we're bringing, please just reach out and reply to my message, and we can set something up, because a lot of these conversations we have on change chats have led to engagements, which is fantastic. And again, timing wise, I think in LGR in the process with decisions, it's a very kind of poignant time in terms of councils and leaders looking to support their individuals, especially once decisions are made. So yeah, please do reach out. We'd love to have a chat with you. And yeah, thank you for joining. I hope there's been some good stuff to take away. Thank you very much, Lucy, as always, for your insight and expertise sharing. So yes, please enjoy the rest of your Fridays. Hope you've enjoyed, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you, Lucy.